where is the differentiator or the lanes between influence, power, and status? Where do we think that they are one and the same? And where do they need to be broken apart?
They're all conceptually distinct. Influence is going to be an effect on our audience. So we are going to get our audience to do something that we want them to do. Power and status are sources of influence. They're not the only sources, but they are sources. Power is controlling resources that people value. If I hold the car keys and I have a teenager who wants to borrow the car, holding the car keys is the valued resource. And because I hold the valued resource, I have some influence. So I can set some ground rules and I say, I want you to do this. I want you to do that. Call me when you get here. I only want you to be out till this late. I can be influential. And the only reason he's likely to listen to me is because I'm holding the valued resource. So they're separate, but that's how power can be a source of influence. You at work or in your life can get other people to do what you want them to do. Why? Because you're holding something they value. And they understand if they don't do what you want, they're not going to get the thing that they really care about.
The idea of job security is outdated as a landline. If you haven't been in a search for a while, it's probable you will at some point, by choice or not. Most executives admit to staying way too long or sense what's coming and justify staying anyway. Here, there's another reason. The faulty belief that navigating to what's next will inevitably be worse and has to suck. Screw that. Lauren Greif has spent a lifetime in corporate and executive search, calling bullshit on stale career advice that most still use. This is Career Blast in a Half, the career podcast for executives ready to cut past outdated career advice to fuel your outcomes now. So let's go.
Hey. I have a question for you, dear listener. Did you ever think that in order to be a badass, you also had to be a B word? Like you could not be a badass and also have people like you at the same time? That's what I used to think. That's what I thought long before I got my hands on this here book that you probably can't see right now called Likeable Badass. And the subtitle for this book is so good. How Women Get the Success That They Deserve. And we are so fortunate today to have the author of this book, Allison Fragale, PhD and literal thought leader in this space, here as our guest. And so, Allison, I don't even know what to say. Like, I'm like super gushy, not because like I think you're like on some kind of pedestal, but just because you put words to so many things that I think us as women are conflicted about, right? Because I didn't understand any of this until I understood it clearly from this book. So thank you. And please just like, come on board, come and say something.
Thank you. Well, I'm so glad this brought us together. It's brought me into contact with so many amazing women. So I love all of it.
So we're going to get into this thing about the book, right? But before you had this book, right, you were still moving and shaking and doing your thing. And I'm curious, like, what was the moment or the kind of come to Jesus, like, signal that said, there is something here that people need to know about. Like these two things that seem to be fighting each other, they need to come together. Like they need to be put into a new framework. What was the moment that kicked that off?
Yeah, there wasn't a single moment, but what there was just an evolution of serving women. That really, I think, is the turning point. The book was based on a lot of my research that I have been doing for a long time. But what happened is, like many people do, I existed in worlds that were majority men. So, I had an industry career, but I eventually become a professor, a business school professor, organizational psychologist. And I have a lot of male colleagues, but more importantly, I have a lot of male audiences where there are more men than women, either in my MBA classes or in the companies that I'm speaking to. But there's always people after an event, a public event like that will come up to you and want to speak to you one-on-one. They'll form their little line at the podium to talk to you. And I always noticed that line always had more women in it than it did men. And I think it was for two reasons. One, that women were struggling with things that their male colleagues weren't struggling with. And I was one of the few people they saw that looked like them. So they thought maybe Allison will know and I'll ask her. So I started giving a lot of podium coaching to women based on my expertise, which is behavioral science, and helping women think about, okay, well, if this is true in psychology, how could we use this truth to help us get better results for whatever it is that you're struggling with, right? Whether it's being recognized, promoted, having your voice heard, balancing your life, whatever it is. And so I started doing that. And then from there, I started developing content that was specifically designed to try to reach women. But every single time I would do an event like that, I would speak to a woman, there would just be this overwhelming, like, where have you been all my life? Thank you. This is what I needed to know. And I thought, we aren't doing a very good job of disseminating information that psychologists do know in ways that women could use that would help them live their best lives. So that's what I became committed to doing and looking for audiences of women to serve. And then the book was just the next evolution, like next step in that, to say, how do I reach people that I might never sit in my class? How do I reach people who might never sit in one of my programs? And the Likeable Badass, which we can unpack, where that really comes from, is the science of my work and many other people about what we know about how human beings form judgments of other human beings and trying to help people understand what that is so that you can control it.
So I want you to go back to your little podium coachings like setup, or even the afterwards where you're doing the handshaking and all that kind of stuff. What were some of the things that were consistently showing up as those themes? What were they asking you that the male attendees were not?
Yeah, well, they were asking me a lot about how do you negotiate and influence effectively? Why? Because that's a topic that I have spoken about for 20 years. So when I'm telling people to negotiate and influence, they start thinking, okay, well, where am I trying to do that and struggling? Where do I feel like I lack confidence to do that? So a lot of those questions were really about how do I get more power? Generally at work, how do I get promoted? How do I get paid? A lot of people wanted me to wanted me to talk to them about their upcoming performance review when they're going to go in and they're going to negotiate for something. So that was the flavor. But underlying that, a lot of the advice I was giving had to do with this topic that I've spent a lot of time researching, which is status. And that is what women were essentially saying in all different kinds of words was, I often confront audiences, whether it's my boss, my clients, my coworkers, who don't really value me all that much. And therefore, I'm not getting anywhere with them. And I said, that makes sense, right? If your audience doesn't value you, it's going to be pretty hard to be influential. I mean, that once you say it like that, it's painful when it's you. But when you say it, you're like, oh yeah, that's probably true. Yeah, I'm not very influenced by people I don't respect. So I won't influence them either. So those were the nature of it. A lot of about how do I move up in my career and why am I not moving up? And partly out of answering those questions, that's where I realized that there were gaps, even in my own teaching of the things that I was teaching people to do wasn't helping everybody, particularly women, but not only women, realize that they might have some additional things that they absolutely could do and could control, but I was giving incomplete advice.
Okay. You just totally set yourself up beautifully for this next question.
Oh,
right?
okay. I love it.
You just put an on-ramp together
Okay.
that was like, I'm going to celebrate.
I'm here for it.
Okay. So now they're asking you all these questions, many of which you just broke down. And you said, I want to have more influence. I want to have more power. I want to get seen as somebody who is going to generate, more in by way of my compensation. Where does these two where is the differentiator or the lanes between influence, power, you guys can't see me, and status? Where do we think that they are one and the same? And where do they need to be broken apart?
Yeah, they're all conceptually distinct. So influence is going to be an effect on our audience. So we are going to get our audience to do something that we want them to do, which could include thinking something we want them to think. But we're going to have an effect on our audience. That's what influence is. Power and status are sources of influence. They're not the only sources, but they are sources, meaning what is power? Power is controlling resources that people value. So if I hold the car keys and I have a teenager who wants to borrow the car, holding the car keys is the valued resource. And because I hold the valued resource, I have some influence. So I can set some ground rules and I say, I want you to do this. I want you to do that. I want you to, call me when you get here. I only want you to be out till this late. Oh, by the way, you need to clean the house before you go, et cetera, et cetera. So I can be influential. And the only reason he's likely to listen to me is because I'm holding the valued resource. So they're separate, but that's how power can be a source of influence. You at work or in your life can get other people to do what you want them to do. Why? Because you're holding something they value. And they understand if they don't do what you want, they're not going to get the thing that they really care about.
So wait, I just want to ask you something.
Yeah.
Like, I appreciate the great metaphor with your teenager, but now I want you to take this into the corporate world and bring it to the audience who is like in that position. Either they are in a job search and they're interviewing. Either they are, they've been held back from a promotion. Where is this power in this scenario? Yeah. Where does that apply?
Yeah. So the influence, is what you want the person to do. I want you to hire me. I want you to give me a good performance evaluation. I want you to give me the raise. That's what you're trying to do, how you're trying to be influential. And then who has the ability to give that to you or not? So if I'm and a lot of times, like hiring is a good example where people will want to talk to me about, well, who at the end of the day actually has the say over whether I get hired? Is it the person sitting in the interview? Maybe, maybe not. Is it the person I'm ultimately going to work for, who may not be the person interviewing me right now, but they're going to have the say? So the person who can say, yes, you get the job, whoever that is, they have the authority to say, yes, we're taking you. That is the person that has the power in that situation. And obviously, if you know that person has the power, and you want to influence them, it's going to affect how you show up because you want them to give you this valued thing. If you control the budget, if you can get someone the raise, if you can give someone the good performance review or the bad one, these are all different resources that we control at work that other people want. You control the information flow. And when you have these things, then you have power. And as a result, people might be more likely to do what you say. You're influential. Why? Because they want the resource that you hold. So that's the relationship at work.
And then there's also, let's just say it, the dark side of power, right? So now you have this power, but what I love is that you kind of pulled the wool off of it. Yeah, that's really good that you have the power, but it doesn't mean people actually like or respect you.
Well, that's right. So that's where you get this third variable, which I haven't answered yet, which is what is the status thing and where does that come in? And status is how much you're respected and valued by other people. It can be it is a source of influence. If I really respect you, I do really respect you. I really respect you. And therefore you're going to give me some advice. And you're going to say, here, Allison, here's what you need to do on insert the topic. Oh, I'm going to start a podcast, which I'm, by the way, never doing. But, and I say, and Lauren says, okay, let me tell you how to do it. And I respect what you've done. I'm going to listen to you. So you're influential, not because you have any control over what I do with my podcast. You don't have any power over me, but I respect your expertise, your opinion. I value you. And therefore, when you talk, I'm going to listen. So being well respected, even if you don't control stuff, is a huge source of influence. And you can think about at work, there are people who you value their advice. So, I think about staff people that I've worked with or an administrative assistant who has no authority over me whatsoever, but they know how things work. And if I ask them a question, how do I get X done? And they say, here's what you need to do. If you want to, get this expenditure approved, if you want to schedule this class, whatever you want to do. And they say, let me tell you how it's done. I would follow their advice. They'd be influential because I'd say they know what they're doing. And that's what status is. And they're both really, really, really valuable. Typically we talk a lot more about power, about controlling things, about being in charge. We know what that looks like. We know what status is too, but we don't have a label for it as clearly. And as a result, we often don't understand the relationship between them. So a lot of that podium coaching I was doing for women was helping them understand that resources follow respect. What I mean by
Mm,
that is, if you want someone to give you whatever the resource is, you want them to give you the job, they want them to hire you. You want them to give you the money to go spend on your initiative. If someone's going to do that voluntarily, they're going to give you the resources. They're much more likely to give you those resources if they respect that you're going to use them well, and they're going to benefit from it.
okay. Wait, I have like a seven. Like, I mean,
Yeah,
I'm
do
going to
it.
like go stop this right now because I got to ask you a very loaded question.
Yeah.
Now you're in a job search, like, right? Where does the respect come from before the resources to hire you? You're in the job market. You're not necessarily in a company. And where doesn't it come from?
So, okay, well, I'll answer this question for very generally, then we can talk about it in the context of a job search. Where does respect come from is a great question. When people decide, do they respect another human being? Those judgments are not random. The judgments you make about other people are not random. That's where the title of the book, Likeable Badass, comes in. Is it catchy? I think so, but it's not just catchy. It represents the two dimensions that our brains pay attention to when we decide, do I respect you? There are two things we value. We value people who are going to treat us well. We're trying to figure out when we meet somebody, are you a friend or are you a foe? A friend is going to be somebody who's going to care about us. They're going to not just prioritize themselves, they're going to benefit us as well. So we care about people's intentions toward others. And I use the term likable on the cover. Psychologists will use the term warm, but the general idea is, are you perceived as possessing characteristics that are useful for other people? Like, not just likable, but are you caring? Are you honest? Are you sincere? Are you pleasant? Are you cooperative? Anybody who has those characteristics, that's going to be a good person to interact with because they're going to not just care about themselves. So that's one thing. The second thing we care about is, can you get stuff done? If I give you a task, can I trust you? Can I rely on you? Are you organized? Are you competent? Are you dependable? Are you persistent? Can I trust that not only you care about me, you have the skills to actually benefit me? You need both. You need the intent and you need the skills. And when I believe a person has the skills and the intent to make my life better, I respect that and I value it. So we don't like self-interested people, and we don't really like bumbling, incompetent people, because even if their heart's in the right place, they can't do anything for us.
Right.
So we need both. And so that's what we respect. So going back to it, so badass was my catchy term for that, a dimension of assertiveness or capability. So anytime someone shows up in your world and they convince your brain, this is a person that knows what they're doing and cares about people other than themselves, your brain will say, okay, I like that person. I value that person. In a job search, there's a lot of things that we can pay attention to. The beauty of respect and the double-edged sword of respect is that how easy it is for it to be, for you to shape it. So sometimes you might do something careless and people draw a lot of conclusions about that. So if you're on social media doing something unkind, arguing, putting nasty comments in someone's post, if you're on social media doing something that suggests you're not very capable, think like spring break shots and yard long margaritas, I don't know. That doesn't mean you're not capable, but people could draw conclusions for that. Like, I don't really find that the keg stand photo is going to be my next CEO. People get to conclude things about you, even if the conclusion is wrong. But there's a lot of simple ways and easy ways, even at a distance, we can shape someone's perceptions of how capable and caring we are. So in a job search, for example, the questions I ask when I say, tell me about what success looks like to you here. Tell me about what a great culture fit will be. Tell me about how people can hit the ground running. All the different things you can ask that you can say to the person. This person doesn't just care about like how much money they're going to make in their title. This person cares about how much they're going to contribute. When you talk about your experiences, the stories you tell about yourself, and what you share, your storytelling is to say, oh, and by the way, I'm good at what I do. You can trust me. And so even in a 20-minute introductory interview, people can leave and say, I really like that person. I can see myself working with them. They seem like they really want to put good things out there for other people. And I'm pretty convinced if I gave them something to do, they would do it well, just from the storytelling. So those are the two dimensions we're trying to hit on. And we get to, as people get to know us better, they can update their opinions. But even in short interactions, if you start to think about these two dimensions now and you start to observe them, you go to a coffee shop and you end up like in a long line talking to somebody for 5 or 6 minutes, and you'd be surprised, right? What conclusions you've already drawn by the end of a couple of minutes of conversation, just from how that person has talked about themselves and talked to you, and how they've ordered their coffee and how polite they were when they, interacted with the person, and all of that. Your brain is taking it all in, and your brain is saying, okay, I think I know what it's going to be like. Even if I'm wrong, I think I know what it's going to be like to work with that person, how capable and how caring they're going to be.
So I just want to refresh. So these two things that we're talking about, likability and what we'll hear and what you'll read when you get the book, is this idea of being warm or likable, warm and assertive. There's these two things are also other ways of saying likable and competent. And so I think that it's very, very important that you hear, first of all, they're not that much of a high bar, right? Like these two things are not like, overwhelmingly difficult. But I think that it is also a great way to diffuse down or distill down into the areas that you want to really be reinforcing for its own inherent truth, but also to find ways that you may not have necessarily identified on the surface where you can leverage them. There's nothing wrong with that. That is not being manipulative or anything. You're just actually pulling out more goodness from yourself. And that is not, by the way, a bunch of keywords. That's actually you, right? That's you in all your glory. It's in all your interactions. I know we talked a lot about how this plays out in interview settings, but I also want to say, yeah, and don't overlook the networking opportunities either, because networking opportunities that tell people those same things, warmth and assertion, also earn more referrals, right? How could they not?
100%. And I always, on that note, yeah, I mean, I tell people the best time to build your status is when you don't need it. So, right when you don't need anything from somebody, you can have this very natural human interaction where you can show up as very warm and assertive, very likable and badass. As soon as you start to then think, I'm doing that because I now need you to really respect me, you still can. People can show up cold in an interview where they are a complete stranger and they can do a masterful job in a short period of time, developing a relationship and bringing somebody on board. But you can do an even better job if walking into that room, that person has already interacted with you, heard of you, has a positive opinion, etc. And a lot of that is involved in playing the long game, which is doing easy things day in and day out that don't derail your day, that say, you know what, I never know who I'm going to need, right? I mean, I'm at the coffee shop again. I'm thinking that because I'm drinking this latte right now, which is making me very happy. But like, you'd think like, okay, what would I possibly need like my barista for? You're like nothing, except for this coffee. But then something happens, right? That you can't foresee, where, it wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility that my 9-year-old said, I want to have my next birthday party at the Starbucks. And next thing you know, there I am. She hasn't asked for that yet, but again, she likes Starbucks. And there I am. I have to go in for an influence attempt I hadn't anticipated and say, hey, barista that I've talked to week in and week out, getting my coffee. Now I need a favor or some advice from you. How would I bring like 29-year-olds in here into the store and do a party? And so I'm only that idea only came to me because I'm currently drinking my latte. But the idea is we don't know necessarily what we'll need in the future, who we'll interact with, who might be able to help us out, who we might be able to help. And casting a really broad net in your networking piece is important. And I always think that people tend to skip it when they're content. Like, I'm happy where I am right now. I don't need networking. I say, no, that's exactly when you should be doing it, when you're content, because then it's joyous, it's fun, it's authentic. And it is setting yourself up for a future that you do not understand yet, but that when it occurs, you are going to need to lean on your network in a new way. And you will feel well positioned to do it because you have created a group of people who really respect and value you and who are excited to find ways to help you and make you happy.
Yeah, this is always a tricky one for me, not the concept that you shared, but the idea of playing the long game around this, right? Because at least in a lot of situations, we become very reactive or become very transactional too, right? Like, and then we think networking is icky, but networking isn't icky if you haven't done the pre-work before the networking. It does feel ickier because that trust bank is not necessarily as deep as it would be if you had been doing it when you didn't need it, right?
That's right.
So a couple other things that always kind of like park some good questions for me with respect to likable badasses. And I am also always very sensitive of, whatever the climate is. And so now we are in, fourth quarter, we're in an election year, and this isn't a political discussion by any means, but where are some potential hotspots that could show up in either your likability or your assertion? So if you are pro XYZ, does that put any kind of influence over your likability if you're taking a hard stand on something? Or is that something that people respect because you have a backbone? How do those two things kind of marry each other when there are tough calls or decisions to be made? You have to let go of a department. That's not necessarily likable, but it's assertive. How do those kind of uncomfortable situations get to not necessarily win a popularity contest, but come out so that you are not negatively impacting your overall status?
Yeah. So I'll give a couple of answers to this. They're not different answers, but just ways to think. One is that regardless of whether you're in a tough situation or not, a question that once people are aware of these two dimensions, is I say, anytime you're showing up in front of another human being, to take a pause and ask yourself, what can I do in this moment that will help me show up as both assertive and warm? So, and if you do that, and you can find a way to do that, you might be able to take an action, even a tough one, without losing respect. So you gave the example of, let's say I have to lay off people or, do something like that, and say, no one's going to be excited about that. That's a very bad day for a lot of people. But is there a way that I can show up human to human that is both assertive and warm? So I can be very clear on this is what's happening, but like, where is the opportunity for warmth? Where is the opportunity to say whatever feels authentic? Like, maybe it's, I don't agree with this and I don't, think you deserve this. Maybe it is to talk about, I will be happy to use my personal network to see what I can do to help you land well, right? If I can do that, please search and let me know if we have any mutual people in common. I would love to recommend you. That could be an act that one could choose to take that showcases your warmth and your concern for other people. So one is, if we ask ourselves that question, we might find, you know what, I still have choices here. I may not have choices in the people need to be laid off or I have to do the tough thing. That is part of my job. And if I don't do it, someone else is going to do it. But I do have a choice in how I show up to do that thing in a way that could convey assertiveness or warmth. So that's one thing to think about. And I'm sure people who have dealt with been on the receiving end of difficult things can recount times when people have done it with a lot of assertiveness and warmth, and when one of those has been absent. So that's one question to ask yourself. The second one is to recognize that initial opinions about people tend to be pretty sticky. That can be really bad news for you if someone doesn't respect you out of the gate and then you're left trying to change their mind. But if you already have their respect, it is also good news for you, meaning that there are going to be moments when people that you respect, they don't show up as their best selves, but you don't completely downgrade your opinion of them. Why? Because you already have given them the benefit of the doubt. In psychology, we call it confirmation bias. So we can have the luxury of, once we have the respect, acting to the contrary without people saying, I've written you off, forget it, I no longer respect you. So that's the second thing, is you don't maybe not have to worry about it as much as you fear in your head. And the third one is, yeah, there are times when you might have to take an action. And the result of that action is people see you as much less likable or less assertive than you were previously. And the question you have to ask yourself is it worth it? And so I do, in the book, walk readers through this idea of starting with longer term end goals and working backward. And in doing so, if you understand what your end goals are, it makes some of the tough decisions today easier. So in the book, I give an example of my grandmother, which seems perhaps appropriate to share that story here. My maternal grandmother, who's long deceased, was a very, very, very avid Democratic campaign person in her community. She was, still to this day, one of the staunchest Democrats I've ever met. I am not a very political person, but my grandmother was, and I grew up listening to her. And there was only one right side of this. This was the side the Democrats were on. This is how it's going to be. And she would tell everybody who would listen in a way that I never would, because one, even to the extent I shared her beliefs, I would just not feel like it was worth the risk to my status to go about, offending people, being different from people, telling people what I wanted them to do, et cetera, because that wasn't my dream. And so my grandmother had a very strong vision of what she wanted her future to look like, which was the future was going to be a world in which there were only Democrats, as far as I think my grandmother, and that every elected person would be a Democrat. And because that was a goal she held very, very close to her heart, she never had any conflict about like how people would see her. Some people wouldn't like her. Some people wouldn't respect her, but she was okay with that because she was serving a mission that she thought was really, really important. And once you decide whatever it is, it starts to give you clarity. Politics aren't really part of my mission. One of the things I want to do, right, is I want to help uplift women and create opportunities for women. So, I've waded into only with one pinky toe politics, only because one of our candidates is a woman. And there are things as a psychologist that I can say about women in power and women with status that don't really have anything to do with politics. But I stay in my lane because I think, what is my lane? My lane is trying to help women live their best lives and excel at work. And so anything I can do, I don't mind ruffling feathers, but I'm only going to ruffle feathers in that domain, because that is the area in which I care a lot about making a contribution. So I think once we start at the end, then we get a lot of clarity about, is this something I want to stand for today? And that I think is very, very helpful to people. It removes a lot of the conflict of should I, shouldn't I, that we experience in the moment once you've identified what your longer term goals are.
I could listen to you all day, and I mean, I'm happy to continue to just pepper you with questions. We could make this like an ongoing series, because there's so much goodness here. And I just think that what you're sharing is both refreshing and also the what I want to say is like the right kick in the ass for the badass, right? It's like we all need to know what those levers are. And one of the things that I'm sure people ask you this, but I'm just going to also pose for our audience too. Allison, I'm going to pretend like you're doing the podium thing. Allison, I'm really curious. I mean, isn't there like this level of self-betrayal that's going to show up here if I have to pretend that I'm likable? Like, what if I'm not really likable? Should I just fake it because I know that's going to get me status?
So what I always tell people, no one's ever asked it quite that way, but I always say, if you do not care about other people and you are not competent at something, I cannot help you. I am only talking to people. My audience is people who do care about other people and are competent at something. And if that's the case, then it's completely authentic, because you're telling me you care about people. So figure out how to show it. And you're telling me you're good at something. So figure out how to show it. And so, yeah, if you are inherently an unlikable person who cares only about yourself, then yes, acting likable would be faking it. And that's your choice, but I don't really have a lot of advice for it. So I think what people oftentimes are saying in this is, they have a vision of a version of likability that they think they have to put on. I have to wear pastels or smile or giggle or I have no idea what. And I don't want to do that thing. And there, I think there is true room for authenticity, which is you just need to find some way to convince your audience that you care about people other than yourself. When I recommend we were talking offline and I said, here's somebody on LinkedIn whose posts I think you would really enjoy following and they would have benefit to your life, right? As in the moment that I say that, you're like, oh, Allison was offering something to make my life better. Allison cares about people. I didn't do anything except drop a name that I knew. But so there's lots of different ways to do that. That's not smiling or wearing pink or anything. That's just saying, hey, I learned about what you're interested in, and this might have value to you. So thinking about your unique way to do it. And that's where authenticity meets strategy, which is I do care. And I do know certain things. And so how can I use the things I know to benefit other people? And when I do that, I am authentically showing up in a very strategic way because it's showing my audience that I care about their outcomes and I have value to add to their lives. And again, as soon as we believe that, we keep coming back to those people again and again. We want more from them because we respect them and we value them.
All right. Well, you put all those pieces into place. You created a flywheel and a loop so that we could actually see where all of these things are not only interconnected, but how they build momentum. And I am just delighted. Allison, I mean, I could give away the coordinates, but I think you would be better at it. Where could we find you? Where should people go to get the book? What should they do when they want to hire you as a keynote speaker? What should we do? Like, what if I wanted to get a class with you?
Yeah. Okay. So the one-stop shop to be my friend is my website, AllisonFragale.com. When you go there, you can get every retailer's link to buy the book. You can buy the book anywhere you like buying books. It's everywhere. You can see information about me as a speaker, but then there are 3 ways to stay connected with me to see content. One is I do have a newsletter that I publish through Substack. It's free. And so you can sign up for it. It's called The Upper Hand, Behavioral Science to Help Women Excel. You can get there through my website. I'm on LinkedIn, which is how I think that's how we became to know each other, right? LinkedIn brings a lot of the best people together. And then as more recently, but I am on there daily, is I'm on Instagram. So those would be the 3 free ways that people can stay and interact with me, message me, et cetera, and see content that I put out, all related to staying in my lane, which is behavioral science for women, helping women live their best lives.
That's me giving a round of applause.
Yay!
Thank you, Allison, for being here, for lifting me up, for lifting everyone who's listening up, whether you're a man or a woman, because I know you also, people are like, what do you mean? I want to get lifted up by Allison. You don't have to be a man or a woman. It just happens to be your lane that you are speaking specifically to women, but we can all benefit. And so I want to thank everybody who is listening today. Please pass this episode along. This is a juicy one. Also, if you like this episode, it's coming right now. Please write a review. Help us to help you by sharing a review and also subscribing to Career Blast and a Half. We're really like making some strides here. I'm like really, really fired up. We have so many guests coming up, and this one in particular was one that I've been excited and waiting for. And I just love me to get a book in advance and then like meet the real deal. So thank you for being here today, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining today. We appreciate your listening ears. Big time. We ask this: use these tools, not tomorrow, right now, and share them by spreading the love, leaving us a rating and subscribe so you don't miss the next Career Blast in a Half. Most of all, thank you for you.